Hello, my friends. I'm Eileen, the Mellow Astrologer, and as you likely know, we are in Sagittarius season. So I wanted to give you an overview of what that means and what you can expect during the next few weeks that we are in Sag season, essentially up until December 23rd, right before Christmas. This month, before I dive right into Sagittarius, is jam-packed with astrological events. We have an eclipse coming up on December 3rd. That is a new moon solar eclipse in the sign of Sagittarius. If you don't already know, the new moon is always in the sign that the sun occupies. It's when the sun and the moon come together in what we call a conjunction. So we do have that eclipse coming up, which is eclipses are always big events, big energy. There can be a lot of movement and changes during that time, and generally some unexpected surprises, good or bad. It's nothing to be feared. It just is what it is. And we do have several eclipse seasons every year. So this is something that is always happening and we're always experiencing, whether we're aware of it or not. But of course, when we are aware of it, then we can work with the energies a bit differently, hopefully to our advantage, right? In addition to the eclipse, we also have Mars moving into the sign of Sagittarius on December 13th. And right now we have Mercury and the Sun in the sign of Sag. And so Mars will be joining the Sun and Mercury on December 13th. And on December 19th, Venus goes retrograde. She's in the sign of Capricorn. And I'll be speaking to that in a different video because that's a juicy subject, Venus being the planet of love and money, among other things. And she's occupying the sign of Capricorn, which is responsibility and integrity, karma, and money, money, money. So I heard an astrologer once say that Venus retrograde is the season of the X, because Venus is our relationship to ourselves and our relationship to others. And I thought that was quite amusing. So that is why there will be a whole separate video about Venus retrograde. I just want to thank you so much for watching this video. And if you do derive value from my content, I encourage you to like the video and hit the subscribe button. And please, there is nothing I love more than talking astrology. It is my greatest passion. So leave a comment or a question if you have one, and I will definitely respond. So jumping into Sagittarius, we actually need to begin with Scorpio. So we just exited Scorpio season and now we're in Sag season. And the reason I'm bringing up Scorpio is because from the evolutionary astrology perspective, and I am an evolutionary astrologer, we're looking at the transcendence of the signs, meaning one sign moving into the next, and how this is useful or beneficial to the soul's evolutionary growth. So to understand Sagittarius in its entirety, we need to first understand a bit about Scorpio, and before Scorpio is Libra, so on and so forth, right? So Scorpio season, first of all, Scorpio is a water sign, so it's usually a very intense emotional time. And I'm speaking generalities, of course, because the sun is transiting each person's chart a little bit differently based on the time of your birth. So where the sun is falling in my personal horoscope maybe isn't where it's falling for you. And so we're going to experience these energies a little bit differently, okay? But generally, the archetypes that are associated with each sign and with each energy is universal. That's why they're archetypes. It's universal experience of the human psyche, okay? So Scorpio season is often very intense. I love this word. For me, it's absolutely the key word for Scorpio. If you think of no other word when it comes to Scorpio, in terms of how the energy presents, it's very, very intense. It's very emotional as a water sign. But what Scorpio from the evolutionary perspective is the purpose of scorpionic energy, which we all have in our charts, whether or not we are a Scorpio. So don't dismiss this saying, Eileen, I'm not a Scorpio, why does this matter to me? Because we all have Scorpio in our chart and we all experience Scorpio season every year. So this matters hugely, okay? Now, Scorpio is about identifying one's inner limitations so that they can be transformed. And in the process of that transformation of the inner limitation, we find empowerment. And this is the soul's evolutionary journey. The Scorpio Pluto is the planet that rules the sign of Scorpio. Scorpio and Pluto are representative of the soul in evolutionary astrology. So we're looking at the soul's evolutionary transformation. If I break that down a little bit for you, what we're really getting at here is that the ego constructs various defense mechanisms throughout life, mostly in early childhood, to navigate life and to protect itself. And as we age, those defense mechanisms typically are not as useful as they once were. And so we experience various degrees of suffering in our life, right? My spiritual teacher says that probably 90% of what we experience as suffering is optional, meaning it's the story that we're telling about our reality that creates the suffering versus the actual lived experience. And of course, there's suffering in life, death and health problems. All of these things are sources of suffering that are we're not necessarily telling stories about, but we can increase our suffering by the stories that we tell ourselves about all of life. So Scorpio is about, I'm suffering. Why am I suffering? If it is something that is that I'm responsible for, then let me identify that and shift the behavior so that that source of suffering can be transformed. And again, in that process, you become very empowered, right? It's like, oh, I actually do have some ability to affect change within my life. So Scorpio is about inner limitations, and then we move into the sign of Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is an extroverted fire sign. It's very fun-loving and gregarious and spontaneous, and it likes to take risks and adventure, whereas Scorpio is very introverted and emotional, and it just wants to have a lot of depth with a few friends and close friends and family members, whereas Sag is kind of, in a lot of ways, it's the opposite. It's like, I'll talk to anybody and I'll go anywhere and do anything with anyone as long as I'm getting that taste of life, that I get to explore life. Now, fundamentally, Sagittarius is about truth and truth consciousness. Now, these are really big kind of transcendent words, and how does this look in our daily lives, right? So we are in Scorpio season where we're maybe identifying or having the experience of limitation, inner limitation. And then we move into Sagittarius season, and there is a lightening of the mood. Your mood will be elevated during Sag season because it's fire, and the fire element. Fire is basically prana. It's energy, so it's movement, whereas water is associated with the emotional body and fire is action oriented. So right there you can see, if you just feel into your body, there's a difference, right, between when you think of something emotional versus when you think of taking action and going out and having fun and being spontaneous, etc. So in terms of the truth consciousness, we're taking what we've learned from Scorpio season and really getting to see in Sagittarius season, like what is fundamentally true about our experiences. Not just for yourself, but also collectively. I typically use the example of the smile. Like, we all know it doesn't matter where on earth you might be dropped, facial expressions are universally true, right? So every person in every culture smiles as an expression of happiness, right? Some form of happiness. But for each of us, we also have our individual truths. And so Sagittarius is really about identifying through this evolutionary process what is true. And it does that through, where Scorpio does it through the internal process, the self-reflective process, Sagittarius is doing it by experiencing life. So rather than turning the lens inward, which is what Scorpionic energy does, Sagittarius is turning that lens outward, but in so doing, it also gets to experience what's true for itself. But typically, we can think of the Sagittarius energy as having that lens turned outward, okay? Because it's experiencing life, and it's through the experience of life that it gets to know itself better. So Sagittarius is often associated with cultural pursuits and endeavors because it is out gallivanting around the world. Typically, it loves to be out exploring and really getting to know what is What is true for people who live in Asia? What is true for people who live in South America? What is true for people who live on the other side of my own country? Or what is true for people, like I live in a rural community right now, but I used to live in a city. So what is true for people who live in big cities is not true of people who live in rural communities. And then of course there's overlap. So this is the Sagittarian archetype, is it really wants to explore, and it has its own personal endeavors that it wants to pursue. And whether or not Sagittarius energy or a Sagittarius person who has strong Sagittarian energy, whether or not they're thinking this to themselves is entirely different, right? Of course, most of us aren't moving through life going, let me examine my personal inner limitations and then see how that stacks up in my personal truth versus collective truth, right? We're not necessarily thinking in those terms, but that is actually typically what we're doing, because all of these archetypes, as I mentioned, are universal, meaning we're all experiencing them in one aspect or another, right? Some of us will experience them more strongly than others. What's important to remember about Sagittarius is that because it is the archetype of truth, and all of these energies exist on a spectrum, the opposition to truth is lying and deception, and also dogma. So Sagittarius is associated with spirituality, religion, philosophy. It is the teacher, the guru, and the religious hierarchy generally, okay? And because these are the domains or the arenas of life where truth is peddled, so to speak. And again, this is why the Sagittarius archetype is so important, because if we're focusing on what's true for oneself, then you can often, excuse me, discern what is true outside of oneself. And you know, right now we're going through this whole, in the United States at least, this whole fake news conversation. That's a polite way of saying it. It's become very divisive in the United States, which, by the way, has a very strong Sagittarius energy in its chart. And as I interact with folks, especially, there's a lot of conversation between politics and COVID, right? These are the two hot button issues right now. And a lot of my friends have said to me, I just don't know it's true. How many times have you said that to yourself? I don't know it's true. I personally have abstained from having too many opinions about COVID or politics in recent years because I simply don't have the time or energy to educate myself thoroughly enough to have an opinion, right? But most people have opinions, even though they probably shouldn't, because they're not actually educated well enough, but they think that they are. And this is part of the Sagittarius archetype. And the polarity point to Sagittarius in the zodiac is Gemini. So Gemini is the student, Sagittarius is the teacher, but both are either consuming and or disseminating information. As a result, both can be know-it-alls. They like to think that they have all the information all the time, when in reality, not so much, okay? So this is where we need to be careful with Sagittarian energy, and also realizing that you might have all the information that you personally need, but is that going to be true for your best friend or your neighbor or a person of color or someone of a different gender? Not likely, right? So what was I saying? What was my point here? I was talking about COVID. The reason I bring this up is not to talk about COVID. Nobody wants to talk about that. I'm not even going to use the word again. But as my friends have said, as I've had conversations with friends about what is true and how do we discern the truth, one thing that I have personally experienced through my spiritual practice, and I encourage all of you to identify if this is true for you, because of course only you know. I cannot tell you what's true for you. I cannot tell you what is universally true. My personal experience is that when you identify what is true, there is no feeling of agitation. So love is truthful, You can love somebody, and that might have a pleasant association or feeling, right? Mentally, in the body, physically, emotionally. So it does have some sort of energetic signature. But I've never gotten to the core truth of any situation or conflict or personal belief that feels bad. I might not like it. I might be resistant to the truth being as it is, but it doesn't create like a schism, it doesn't create like a division within the psyche or within the system. And I'm reminded of a story that my mom told me where she asked somebody who was watching a lot of political television, like, how do you feel when you watch that? Like when you turn that off, how do you feel in your body? And the response was not so good. Like, it makes me feel bad, it makes me agitate, it makes me angry, it makes me da, 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 da. And nowhere did these individuals say, I walk away from watching political TV feeling peaceful and well rested and in a state of empowerment, right? That's what the truth will leave you with. So again, even if you don't like the truth or you don't want it to be true, we've all had those moments, right? Where you wake up one morning and you realize that man that I've been dating, not for me. Or you realize that job I've been pursuing, not for me. For any number of reasons, right? So those are hard truths to swallow. But typically, especially if you have a meditation practice, you know what I'm talking about. There is a still small voice of God that tells the truth. It tells the truth. It tells you what's true for you. And it tells you, okay, I hear that politician talking, or I hear my pastor talking, or I hear my professor talking, and there's something that I'm not resonating with, right? And sometimes that can be the collective truth, and sometimes that's just one's personal truth when we don't resonate. But I'm spending so much time talking about this because, each astrological sign is associated with hundreds, if not thousands, of different human archetypes from, physical, like each sign is associated with different body parts. Each sign is associated with different emotional feelings, etc., etc. And so the study of astrology is truly like so vast and endless. But what I'm trying to do with these videos is really like hone in on the most fundamental core aspect of each one of these archetypes. Because we could get so lost in the weeds. I could sit here talking to you all day about how Sagittarians like to gamble and take risks, and they can be lying liars who lie. They can be, watch out. But that's kind of like, you can get that from any astrology book. What I want you to really take away is the sign of Sagittarius. And when we're in Sagittarius season, we are getting the opportunity to think more keenly about what is true. We have the opportunity to discern what is true for ourselves and what is true for others. Okay, and I really encourage people, especially because we are living in such a divisive moment, for your spiritual contemplation and your practice, I really would encourage you to think, why is it so important for you that somebody agree with you? Why is it so important to you that the majority of people have the same opinion or the same viewpoint or perspective on life? Why is it so frustrating? I'm going to use the masking example again. If you walk into an establishment that wants you to wear a mask and you're anti-mask, why is that so mind-blowingly difficult, right? And if you're one of those people who's like, whatever, they just want me to wear a mask, I don't care, I'm going to respect their request, then you can contemplate that too, okay? Because it's really fundamentally like, are we projecting our truths onto others? Because Sagittarius is about belief systems. I have to say, there's nothing I love more than discerning what is true and thinking about them in terms of belief systems. My spiritual teacher, Scott Killaby. I have two spiritual teachers. Adyashanti is my primary teacher. I've been studying with him since 2014. And just this year, I began studying with Scott Killaby. I encourage you to look him up on YouTube. He's amazing. And he talks about what he describes as deficiency stories in psychological, in the study of psychology. Sorry, I got distracted. In the study of psychology, they would call it a limiting belief. And so most people, as they are on a spiritual or healing path, have heard these terms, Dr. Bruce Lipton, et cetera, et cetera. But that is the Sagittarius archetype. So when you hear somebody saying your deficiency story, they're talking about Sagittarius. When you hear someone say limiting beliefs, they're talking about the Sagittarian archetype. It's, what are you thinking? Why? How is it true? If it's not true, can you do something about it? Not to say that it's easy to do something about it, but this all falls under the Sagittarian archetype. So parting words would be to really contemplate what is true for you. We all have certain things that are fundamentally true for us. And I want you to feel into your body and really think, like, how do I feel when I know that to be true? Because that's your barometer for discerning truth when you're watching TV, when you're listening to the radio, when your friend's talking to you, when your professor's up there talking, whatever authority figure is espousing a belief or information, when you're listening to me, right? So this is how you discern that, is by really getting clear, becoming a clear channel for truth in your own system. And we can only do that when we're clearing out our baggage. So we can only do that through the Scorpio archetype of eliminating the inner limitations. Because when we are blocked, we can't hear the truth. And a lot of people on a spiritual path are actually spiritually bypassing. They have turned off or cut off or repressed and suppressed that emotional experience that Scorpio doesn't just honor, but celebrates. Scorpio really is about going into the depths and going into the darkness, going into the black, decaying, rotten, stained corners of your soul and your psyche and your person, and rooting them out and saying, no, I'm not, that behavior doesn't work anymore. This is not the way I want to communicate anymore. These are not the types of relationships I want anymore. I will not have that bad habit in my life anymore. And then when you do that, you get to the point where you know what's true for you and you're clearing out all that waste, then you can hear it. You can hear it easier, better. When you're meditating, you can get to that state much, I wouldn't want to say much easier, but I think it is easier. That's my experience, that meditation becomes deeper, and I don't want to say meaningful, but like you can more clearly discern what is true through your meditation practice when you're clearing out that waste, those inner limitations, right? When you're calming the monkey mind. The Tao, one of the passages in the Tao, I can't remember it by heart, but it essentially talks about, if you pour sand into a glass of water, and at first the water is very murky, and then slowly the sand falls to the bottom and the water is clear again. That's what meditation allows us to do. That's what the Tao does, right? Is it takes that murky mind, that murky psyche, and slowly allows it to calm until the waters are clear and you can see truth for what it is. Scorpio being the water, of course. I hope this was useful. Please share it if you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment. I appreciate you so much. This, as I mentioned, astrology is my greatest passion. It's my dharma. It's my life's work and service. And so your interest allows me to do what I love most in the world. So thank you so much. It is also the Thanksgiving holiday in the United States. And I just want to take a moment to honor the Nisenan tribe, which is the Native American tribe that originally habitated and still continues to the region where I live right now in Northern California. So I hope you all had a lovely Thanksgiving holiday, and I will see you soon. Ciao, ciao.